productivity is also very, very high. So that's really become part of the debate between economists and labor analysts of all sides of the class struggle. Those type of collaborations, what they do for productivity and the like.
Thank you.
Just a quick one. You were talking about in 36 where there was a much more militant chance for, I guess I would call it takeover of the factories. Is there any, some of the stuff I've been reading lately, I think Richard Wolff is, from University of Massachusetts Amherst, really emphasizes that in order to start the movement from capitalism to socialism, there has to be a takeover and a restructuring at the very basic level of production. Who's going to be in charge and everything. Is there anything, I'm talking in shorthand terms, I assume everybody knows what I'm talking about. Is there anything like that going on in France now? In other words, it's not just a struggle of what is the government going to do, taking over the government, but it's a point of view of actually taking over the means of production at a very basic level. Is there any of that debate going on in France now?
Well, not exactly, but I was following very closely for these last few weeks the events in France all fall, and there was occasionally the press, Le Monde, in fact, their website would occasionally highlight banners and posters that talked about insurrectional strikes. That's to say, strikes that were aimed not only at making the government or the employers do something or not doing something, but provoking a fall of the government and the replacement of something else. Well, that's not quite happening yet. I don't know if that will be on the order of the day. But this is the big debate about the popular fronts. This was really what this is about. This is the debate between the CPs and the far left, the communist parties and the socialists on one hand, who thought the popular front was all they could get, and Trotskyists and other forces on the left that thought that they could have went further. You really have to realize that the French employer class was so intransigent that they refused. There had been a law legalizing unions in the 19th century, but it wasn't respected. There was laws demanding collective bargaining as early as 1919, but it was never instituted. So when they sat down in 1936 with the workers and the government, they were scared. Their factories were being occupied. Workers were acting in a way as if they were the masters and mistresses of these factories and not the capitalist owners. So when Bloom was saying, go back to work, you've won wage increases of 17 to 15%, which is impressive. You've won collective bargaining agreements, or the principle of them. You've won paid vacations, go back to work. Others were saying, why not call for Soviets, that's to say workers' councils, on the model of the Russian Revolution. Why don't we have Soviet partout? Why not have workers' councils everywhere? And so in socialist theory and program, there is lots of debates on the road to socialism, but one of them is based on the model of workers' councils, the type of things that developed spontaneously in Russia in 1905, and then in 1917 that happened in various other places, in Austria, in Hungary, in Germany, the big one in 1919, and even in Italy at that time as well. So these are the big questions of transformation. Will it take place from below? Will it take place at the summit? Will there be a new government elected? What will the government do? Well, I look forward to when we have these debates, not in an academic or theoretical or historical sense, but in one of immediate politics in France and here in the United States. I'm sure you do too.
But they've won all their demands, and we have not. And even Germany can control it better than the French, but they're the number one in so many things. Medical, they work less, they work 35 hours a week, and they want to defend that from them. From the right-wing government that they have now. So, I don't see anything that's wrong with that. I'd just like to do it over here.
Well, no. When I'm associating myself with criticism of the Popular Front, it's not of the gains that were made, but what could have been lost. what was lost, what could have been gained, what more could have been. France, the argument is, amongst historians and others, was it a missed opportunity? Could French workers have taken over the government? That's the argument. But what about Spain? Spain was a lot more tragic. The dynamics of the Popular Front, its contradictions, resulted in a bloody civil war, the victory of fascist forces, and a Franco government that lasted till 1975, from 1939. So the stakes are very high in these. People don't always look at it this way, but the gains of the U.S. welfare state were also Popular Front type gains as well, because Roosevelt brought in labor leaders into his government. So the argument's made that maybe not as crisp as we've seen it in France, but that we actually did have a Popular Front in this country. And of course, we're all aware of those important gains, Social Security, the Wagner Act, protections for collective bargaining, protections for unionism, and the like. All those come out of those periods.
And all under attack now.
And they're all under attack.
Reference to a word, it's called precariat. I've seen a couple of references online, on news programs. I've heard the word, the class of the precarious people who are at risk. Do you know if that's more common in France, where people understand that they're in a precarious position and they have some alignment among themselves based on that?
You know, it's interesting how language develops about these type of things. The big word in France and in Europe is exclusion. You're excluded from the world of work, from consumerism, from participation in modern contemporary life if you don't have a job, if you don't have some money that comes with it. This is something that Europeans, because of how powerful their movements of the past have been in gaining social gains, that they're not really used to that type of thing. So exclusion is one way of looking at it. And when you ask me that question, I think about the debates in this country about the poor. There's different types of poor in the popular imagination, or in the imagination that think tanks and political commentaries try to form. For example, we have the undeserving poor. These are the people who don't want to work. These are the people who have too many children. These are the people who put a strain on the welfare system, on social services. They don't exist, except for in the imagination of racist conservatives. And then we have a different type of poor. We have the deserving poor, the poor described by sociologist William Julius Wilson, who did much of his work here on the South Side, talked about black neighborhoods that had basically full employment in the 50s, that had an array of social services, had a lot of social organization in the sense of members of the community plugged into one another through community organizations, sense of responsibility and solidarity. Today, those neighborhoods are full of people who don't work because the jobs have gone away. They're all of the social ills that associated with that. So what we have is we have different types of poor. We have a demonized poor, and then we have a poor of people that have been just left behind by changes in national and international economy and politics.
I had another question. And again, this is my ignorance about, France specifically, but I was just wondering, what about wage structures there? For example, what the minimum wage, I mean, they must have a minimum wage. Is it higher? I would guess it would be, relative to like minimum wage, say, well, for example, in Germany or the United States, and how might that in fact impact employment and, what we're referencing earlier with regards to, the availability of jobs there versus problems that we see here in our own economy. Can you speak to that?
Well, they have in France, the minimum wage is called the SMIC. It's an acronym, S-M-I-C. It's very